Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome into my Week 8 start and sit analysis for the tight end position. So far, the tight end position's been pretty darn bad this season, but over the last couple of weeks, some guys have stepped it up, and we may actually have a few more tight ends that we can begin to trust right now. And we're going to be diving into all of that in this video. But before I do that, if your season's not going the way that you had planned, finish strong. But if you need to spice things up a little bit, you can do that right now over on Underdog with all of their weekly redraft leagues, where you can hop in and start playing fantasy football from scratch every single week. And not only that, but we're also doing a huge giveaway right now for anyone that signs up with our code Headliners over on Underdog during the month of October. When you sign up using our code, make a deposit of at least $10 and play in your very first contest, you're gonna be entered into a drawing to win a full-size framed Jonathan Taylor jersey. That's all you need to do. Get signed up over on Underdog and start participating right along with us. But also when you get signed up, you're gonna get a deposit bonus of up to $1,000, and you're gonna get a super special pick'em this week that's almost guaranteed to hit. But Thursday Night Football could be the return of some big reinforcements at the tight end position with TJ Hockenson. Now, all of this depends on whether or not TJ Hockenson can actually make his debut on Thursday Night Football. But his 21-day window to return has already been open. He has been practicing, and head coach Kevin O'Connell made it sound like he felt good that TJ Hockenson was going to be back soon. And if he comes back this week, it is a really good matchup for him. Right now, the LA Rams are allowing the 4th most receiving yards to the tight end position and the most fantasy points as well. TJ Hockenson could have a really big return. He may not play as many snaps as we would like to this week, so his ceiling may not be that high, but this matchup definitely warrants a pretty good floor, especially if you've been holding on to TJ Hockenson and you really don't have anybody else. Prior to week 7, Colby Parkinson had 20 combined targets in his previous 2 games. And then last week, 2 targets. Now Cooper Kupp is set to return, and that's going to be all the targets in the offense going his way. Colby Parkinson was a guy that we really wanted to become fantasy viable with no Nacua and no Kupp. That never ended up happening, unfortunately, and now the chances are even worse. For Philadelphia and Cincinnati, I don't feel like there's going to be a ton of fantasy viable performances here for the tight end position. When you take a look at the Eagles, this would be a great matchup for Dallas Goedert, but he's still going to miss a couple of weeks with his injury. And Grant Calcaterra isn't really an option that I'm looking at, with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Saquon Barkley being the main contributors in this offense. For Cincinnati, Eric All and Drew Sample are basically splitting snaps at the tight end position, with Mike Gesicki working in every once in a while. That's not a great rotation to find fantasy viable performances. When you're running the football, you have Jamar Chase and you have T. Higgins. What in the world is going on in Baltimore? Isaiah Likely looked to be in line for a huge season after week 1. It's been nothing but trending down since then, outside of one really good performance. Just a couple of weeks ago, everybody was done with Mark Andrews. You want to know what's crazy? Even with 2 performances of 0 fantasy points and another performance where he scored less than 2 fantasy points, Mark Andrews is now the tight end 5 on the season. Yeah, and that's not a joke. His stat line over the last 3 weeks: 5 targets, 4 receptions for 55 yards, 4 targets, 3 receptions for 66 yards and a touchdown. And then he goes 4 targets, 4 receptions, 41 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. So if Mark Andrews in this offense are getting their crap together, then Mark Andrews is going to need to find his way back into our fantasy lineup. I'm not willing to jump back up there and say he's a must-start tight end moving forward, but if he keeps putting up these performances, he sure will be. There's only one player that I actually trust in the Cleveland offense, and that's going to be David Njoku. Going up against Baltimore, who allows the most receiving yards to opposing tight ends, David Njoku should be a main target for Jameis Winston this week and hopefully put up some big numbers to go with it. Chiggy Okonkwo kind of came to life last week with Mason Rudolph as his quarterback. He caught all 4 of his targets for 50 yards, and going up against Detroit this week, that absolutely could happen again. but that doesn't mean that this still wouldn't be an extremely risky play if that's what you're looking for. Before finding out that Jameson Williams was going to be missing the next couple of games, Sam Laporta was going to be a risky play for me here going up against the Titans. But this is going to be exactly the type of game now where Detroit needs him to step up. In the secondary, Tennessee is super strong. And if Jared Goff has troubles getting the ball over to Amon-Ra St. Brown consistently this week because of the matchup, Sam Laporta would be a really good second option that may be an X factor here. This matchup is not going to be great for Trey McBride, but when you got a tight end that's consistently near the top of his team in targets, you're setting it and you're forgetting it. Who cares about the ceiling and who cares about the floor? Trey McBride sees more volume than almost any tight end in football right now. Jonnu Smith had a really big game last week, and if it wasn't for Tua returning potentially here in week 8, Jonnu Smith would be a guy that's on my radar. But name the last time that a tight end had a huge fantasy day with Tua as his quarterback. He just doesn't look that way nearly enough. So because of that, we really need to be skipping on Jonnu Smith unless for some reason Tua's not able to go again. Tyler Conklin may have scored a touchdown last week, but when you take a look at the rest of his stat line, doesn't necessarily give you the warm and fuzzies about trying to start him again because he had 4 targets for 4 receptions and only 7 yards. Drake May has made Hunter Henry fantasy viable once again. Over his last 2 games, he's caught 11 of his 14 targets for 133 receiving yards and a touchdown. And if Drake May were here, I'd give him a huge kiss on the lips for making Hunter Henry fantasy viable once again. Don't post that on social media. Atlanta and Tampa Bay could end up being a really good matchup for the tight end position. Kyle Pitts has been playing really well as of recent, and Cade Otton has a really big opportunity in front of him. Over his last 3 games, Kyle Pitts has at least 65 receiving yards in each game, and he has a total of 22 targets during that time frame. Going up against Tampa Bay, who allows the 4th most receiving yards to the tight end position, could be worth your while this week. He's up to tight end 7 now and showing some consistency for once. Cade Otton should see a ton of targets moving forward. Mike Evans is expected to miss multiple weeks, and now Chris Godwin is also going to be missing the rest of the season. Cade Otton was one of the tight ends that played more snaps than anybody else over the last couple of years, but it didn't lead to a whole lot of targets. After Mike Evans went down in week 8, Cade Otton stepped up, and now with Chris Godwin out as well, Cade Otton could be one of the primary targets in this offense. It shouldn't be this difficult, but I'm having trouble getting on board with Tucker Kraft as a consistent fantasy producer for the rest of the season. Now, to be fair, in the offseason, I said Tucker Kraft was going to beat out Luke Musgrave, and he was going to be the tight end, and he could end up having some sneaky fantasy value as well. And he has showed up at times this season. But when you have Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, and Jayden Reed all healthy and on the field together, it just doesn't feel like there's enough leftover targets to make Tucker Kraft consistent. So when you play him, you're shooting for touchdown upside more than anything. And I just feel like people want a little bit more than that, and it's not there. For the last 2 years, Evan Ingram has been one of the main targets for Trevor Lawrence, and going up against Green Bay, who allows the 6th most receiving yards to the tight end position, as long as we see him with 8+ targets this week, he should have a really solid fantasy day overall. Any value that Mo Alley-Cox was picking up with Joe Flacco at quarterback completely dissolves with Anthony Richardson behind center. I absolutely hate to say it, but we can't rely on any of the wide receivers in this offense as of right now, so we can't rely on any of the tight ends either. Dalton Schultz led the Texans in receiving yards last week, but those receiving yards only came on 2 targets. CJ Stroud did not look great, but in this matchup going up against Indianapolis, especially with no Nico Collins, I still think Dalton Schultz could have some sneaky fantasy value. You just have to be ready for his value also to be 0. New Orleans could be getting Taysom Hill back this week, and if that happens, who knows how he's going to be utilized. That all depends on when Derek Carr ends up returning. Right now, for the tight ends in New Orleans, not really anyone I'm willing to run out there. But if there is no Derek Carr and Taysom Hill comes back, my hope is that they do give him a little bit more involved, and because of that, he could have some decent upside this week for you. Will Dissly is probably way closer to being a high risk than he is a low risk right now. But after 80 receiving yards and 11 targets last week, maybe we do need to keep an eye on him, especially since he's got a really favorable matchup. This is a great matchup for Dalton Kincaid going up against the Seahawks, who allow the third most receiving yards to the tight end position. But the problem with Dalton Kincaid is that he hasn't been seeing consistent volume all season long. And now he has to deal with Amari Cooper as well. That's going to continue to make things really difficult for Dalton Kincaid to be consistent. Last week, I talked about Noah Fant, and if you give him 6+ targets, he's going to give you fantasy viable numbers. Well, last week, he only had 4 targets, but he was still somewhat fantasy viable. With no DK Metcalf, it's going to be interesting to see if Noah Fant can be sneaky over the next couple of weeks here while we wait for him to come back from his injury. 13 targets the last 2 weeks for Ja'Tavion Sanders. Now, it hasn't led to a ton of upside, but it's given him a really solid floor. And we're going to keep our fingers crossed if that continues. If you've been having any issues dealing with inconsistencies at the tight end position, Ja'Tavion Sanders could be a name that's still out there. You could grab him up and you could start him moving forward. Lucas Kroll is the tight end 1 in Denver now, and he did see 4 targets last week, but depending on the damage that Denver does to Carolina, he may not even get an opportunity to see that many targets this week because they're just going to run the football, then put the backups in. A pretty poor performance from Travis Kelce this past week, but Noah Gray made a little bit of noise in the offense. And it's going to be interesting to see if they run a whole lot of 2 tight end sets over the next couple of weeks, now that they're dealing with even more injuries to their playmakers in Kansas City. I don't think either of these guys are going to be huge upside tight ends. They could really end up hurting each other, and we'll see if Patrick Mahomes can get his crap together, because right now, he seems to be more of the problem than Kelce, Gray, or anybody else on this offense. The Kansas City Chiefs are allowing the most receiving yards and fantasy points per game to the tight end position. Go ahead and lock in Brock Bowers to have an absolutely huge day. Is really the only pass catcher going up against a defense that can't stop tight ends. Cole Kmet is the definition of win your week and lose your week at the tight end position. He could come out and score a couple of touchdowns and you're going to win your week. He's going to come out and he's going to put up maybe 1 or 2 fantasy points and you're absolutely going to hate it. But there's not a whole lot of other tight ends that are any better than that right now. So if you're going to take a stab at anybody, taking a stab at Cole Kmet is one of your better choices. I definitely feel like Zach Ertz is going to contribute this week. He had 5 targets and a touchdown with Marcus Mariota last week. And it sounds like we're going to have Marcus Mariota once again. Give us a neutral game script here. Give us some Zach Ertz fantasy points. Unfortunately, it doesn't feel like Jake Ferguson is trending in the right direction. He continues to see his targets drop, and a couple of weeks ago against the Detroit Lions, maybe he would have seen more targets if that team could have done anything to stop Detroit or put up some points on their end. But because of that, he didn't end up seeing the field all that much to end the game anyway. Hopefully this week he gets back on track, because not only is Jake Ferguson going to need to be a big part of this Dallas offense, but he's also going to need to be a big part of our fantasy teams down the stretch. Brandon Ayuk tore his ACL. He's done for the year. Deebo Samuel, he was hospitalized with pneumonia. Who knows if he's going to be back this week? George Kittle could end up being the one main pass catcher outside of Juwan Jennings in this offense, and there's going to be a ton of targets that come along with that. Last week for the New York Giants, Theo Johnson played 52 snaps, and he didn't even see 1 target. Daniel Bellinger came in and played 8 snaps, and he even got a target. When your tight end is playing 52 snaps in a game and you're not targeting him once, that's just absolutely a fundamental issue with your offensive scheme. I love Pat Freiermuth, but there is no way that I'm going to be able to play him this week. And that's why he's my Mando must-avoid player at the tight end position for week 8. And this stinks because I love Pat Freiermuth and I wish he was being utilized more. But you know what stinks worse than that? You. Running errands, working all over the place, taking kids here and there. Sometimes you got to clean yourself up real quick, and Mando can help you with exactly that. And their clinically proven formula can eliminate odors for up to 72 hours. So when you're on the go and you're trying to work with a hectic schedule, Mando's there to help keep you fresh and clean. And if you head on over to shopmando.com right now and use code word headliners, you're going to get $5 off their starter pack. That's basically 40% off the entire price. But here's my issue with Pat Freiermuth this week, because Darnell Washington played half as many snaps as Freiermuth last week, but he saw 2 more targets than what Freiermuth did. If for some reason Russell Wilson is going to be looking to Darnell Washington more often, that's going to spell trouble. But also, Michael Pruitt is healthy again, and he's really the run blocking tight end. So when they're hammering the run, that's who you're going to see on the field way more often than Pat Freiermuth. Unfortunately, I just can't go with him right now until we start to see more consistent targets and more consistent playing time. There you have it, Headliner Nation, breaking down all the matchups this week and how it relates to the tight end position. And if you're looking for some sleepers, this is the week to start grabbing some of these guys up. But do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and you really need to turn your bell notifications on. So anytime we're dropping new content, and of course going live, you're gonna know about it right away. Headliner Nation, stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.